Hello and welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. This week, Bridge and I are talking about networking. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Or somewhere in between? And what type of networker are you? Are you intentional, deliberate, with who you choose to spend your time with? Or slightly chaotic? What are the benefits? And are there other ways of achieving your aim without having to glad hand at events whilst juggling canapés and your business cards oblique QR codes? So come and join us for being an intentional networker. Hello.
Hi, Bobby.
I'm going to start with a quote. I've got another one for the end. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I just wanted to say that out loud because you're clearly one of the 5 I spend the majority of my time with. So I hope you are useful in my network.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So I think the idea behind having this topic came, well, partially from Jodie Fulford-Talbot, because when she was on recently as a listener talking about some of the topics that she would like us to cover, she had indicated that she does a lot of work with coaching women in corporate environments, and that one of the big issues that comes up is this idea of personal brand and networking and the importance of networking, particularly for women in their success. And I know that you had listened to that and said, actually, yeah, let's do a networking one. We're also going to be doing a topic on personal brand or branding. So thanks, Jodie, for that.
Can I also share tonight? Because she also, on the guest gift, mentioned networking as well. And so this is also for her because she hates networking. So I think from both angles, having the absolute necessity to have your brand out there in whatever reasons, and also hopefully this episode will be to help those that really don't like doing it very much, or to come up with alternatives that they could. Networking is networking, but hopefully we're going to get into all of the other things that you can actually do around it. And I think the interesting thing for me, actually having researched this as well, is that I'm not that unconvinced. Have I got that the right way around? That's just really bad English. I think that there will be similarities between what we need to do with networking as independents, and it's the same as what anyone needs to be doing networking wise in leadership to promote themselves, whatever it might be.
I think because I'd come at it from the perspective of particularly women, and one of the things that becomes very clear when you look into it, even if you specifically research women and networking and the importance of networking for women, is that there's very little difference in terms of what you do between men and women in terms of networking. But there are some unique elements that help women become more successful, because I think that there are different ways generally that women approach networking, or ways that women approach networking that often differ from men, because I think the reality is that men have been in the game for longer. Generally the idea of networks for men in work are well established, and that what I found was that men are more comfortable asking for favors out of networks that are, even from networks that are quite loose, like they're not very close contacts, whereas women tend to be less comfortable doing that, and also much more aware of the reciprocity in networking. And so, I have to say, I feel Gina's pain in terms of not liking networking. When I first moved to Ireland, I was doing, I think that was it Fiona Galbraith's episode where she talked about the P's, I think it was, and I'd moved position. I can't remember what they were now, but I'd effectively just moved everything. I dropped everything, parachuting myself into a new location with a new role, all of those things. And I'd been told very specifically that within Ireland, networks are everything, and that it's very difficult to get anywhere without networks. And so I spent a lot of time and a lot of discomfort working on networks. And I was really struck. One of the first networking events I went to was a networking event about networking, which is a bit meta. But the speaker was a guy called Kingsley Akins, and he's an Irishman who has a long history. He runs the Networking Institute. And a lot of the things that he said made a massive difference to how I approach networking. And one of the things was, because he said, I know people hate it. People think it's like this transactional thing, that you're selling yourself, and it's all about, you need to get the right people to get the right stuff out of the network. And he said that's completely not what networking is. It's about building relationships. It's about what you can offer to the network. And then you start to see opportunities. But, you don't go into creating contact simply for what you can get out of people. And he said, if you look at it as a relationship and just making connections, whether that's for social reasons, professional reasons, whatever it is, if you approach it like that with less of this idea of I have to do this because this has to happen, then it becomes a much more pleasurable experience. And I really took that away. And I kind of, I looked at it as joining communities, becoming part of communities, creating communities, and just joining. I joined everything. I would go to everything, and just to meet people, to hear what people had to say, to learn, because I was curious, because I wanted to learn about where I was living and what was going on and what opportunities there are. And I really found that made a difference to being at one of those events where you've got your business card and you've got your glass of wine and you're balancing the canapés. And normally I'm standing just by the wine and I just get drunk because it's just all too excruciating. So I found that made a massive difference to my approach to networking. So thanks.
So tell me his name again.
Kingsley Akins.
So interestingly, I was going to tell a story. This is probably going to really wind you up. So I'm just sort of like going to give that as a precursor before I tell this, because I'm not necessarily saying that this is truth, but it will be worthwhile just keeping it as a little tip. So similar to you. Now I'm talking back in 2002. So I'd not long left the army. Well, it'd been 2 years, but I had a baby and I missed all of that as well. And it was the first real opportunity for me going to a networking event, which happened to be on a boat. And it was like a 3-day floating networking event where you couldn't get off the boat. Honestly, this is like your world's first. This is like your world's first nightmare of being introduced to networking. I was like, what the hell am I doing here? So you basically went for free, and loads of suppliers of lots of different HR stuff, be it benefits or training or whatever, were all on this boat, and they paid astronomical amounts of money to be on this boat. And the whole thing was choreographed. So you would be told what table you were sitting on at breakfast, lunch and dinner. You would be hosted by a supplier and you'd meet other people who had been sat on that table as well. And then in between meals, you could book up to have meetings with suppliers about things that you might be interested in. And then, of course, after dinner, I mean, especially if you've got a good supplier, that sounds really bad calling them a supplier, but they were quite good suppliers of alcohol, quite a few of them. So you then end up getting absolutely hammered in the evening. There's a disco on, there was a casino on this bloody boat. I mean, it was just like being on a cruise. But then you'd have to be up again at 8 o'clock the following morning, ready to network again over breakfast. And so I was like, I have no idea how I am going to survive this. So one of the things that I'd done, which paid no end of dividend, was that because you knew who all of these suppliers were, I was meticulous in my planning of, right, who do I want to see? What does the organisation need? Do I need more training and development? Do we need new HR systems, benefit, whatever it might be? So, and I then researched every single person. So whilst I could be in control of the meetings I was having, the meals were just, but at least you could be focusing on food then. But I mean, you get such a range there where, a supplier might bring their laptop and give you a PowerPoint presentation during lunch. I would then avoid them like the plague. Whereas other people were much more chatty or very sociable and buying you lots of drinks. I spent quite a lot of time with them. But all joking aside, I went to that event 3 years on the bounce in the end. And some of my strongest connections, even now, and we're talking 20 years hence, are people I met on that boat. Because the other thing was that I was like, this is going to be like hell on earth. There were also seminars and auditorium type presentations. So there's a workshop you could sign up for how to network. So I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to do that thankfully that was the first evening. But this guy, I can't remember his name, but he said, right, and he had us standing in different groups. So there was groups of just females, women, groups of just men, and mixed groups. And he'd give us a topic and we'd all have to start talking to each other. I mean, it was excruciating. But so he was doing this. And then partway through, he'd yell, stop, don't move. No, don't look at me. He said, I'm going to come round to each group. And he said, I'm going to show you what your dynamics actually look like. So the group of all women were absolutely closed in on each other, really close knit, not an iota of hope of being able to break into the group if you were the person walking into the room. The blokes, the men, were all stood in one line, scanning the room to see who else was coming in, coming out, whatever it might be. And the mixed group, there was openings. And so whilst it may well appear that he was trying something was slightly sexist, it was shown in the room. And it has stood me again, that's 20 years ago. It stood me in such good stead that is what I always do when I'm scanning, going into a room, if I have to go to any of these excruciating events, but also to be the female, to make sure that they're the one making sure that there is an opening. Because it's so easy to do. And I think that plays a lot into our views about relationship building, what you're getting from an event. So it plays absolutely to what you're saying about the relationship building bit versus necessarily this scanning to see what's on the horizon for what else is coming, and it being slightly more transactional. Now I'm being, it's mass generalizations, but having been in the experiment in that first networking workshop, I think I wanted to share it because it's something to be aware of when you're having to do the events. I think the other thing that we want to talk about, though, is what else can you do other than doing the events? But one last thing I wanted to say about, and I wonder where you are in this right now, because I've been thinking about this for me, is I came across this piece that talked about the different types of networker. And it's played out in much bigger detail in a book by Marissa King on the social chemistry, decoding the patterns of human connection. I thought that'd be quite interesting for anyone wanting to get into this. But in a nutshell, she talks about there being 3 networking types. There's the expansionist. So the expansionist is the person who makes loads and loads of connections, lots of social settings, bringing people together. And what they've actually got to be careful about is that they don't burn out because they're trying to juggle all of these connections that they've actually got because there's so many of them. There's then the broker. So they're quite diverse. They're in lots of different sectors and groups that might not normally overlap, but very much the sort of people who can bridge between separate worlds, or can be, I can introduce you to so-and-so from here, that sort of like element to it. And they're always looking for collaborative opportunities. And then there's the convener, who is the person who's much more into those deeper relationships in the same community or industry. They're highly trusted. They build strong, loyal groups around them. But of course, what they then need to be careful of is like the echo chamber, because they're not getting as many diverse viewpoints. And then what Marissa does is that she sort of aligns those with career phases. The expansionist, often very much for somebody in an early career. So try everything. So you're building networks, of course, where you're actually working, but what are you doing outside of that group as well to find other people that will be of not necessarily of use, but you could get insights from, that you can have conversations with, that you can build the relationships with. The broker is more like mid-career. I'm also going to add to that, because I think that that's where you and I are, because it's like new era. because then the conveners are those in more senior positions. I don't think I ever hit that because I didn't like it very much. I didn't necessarily want to be the person bringing all of the group together. I'm very, very happy to be the greatest of supporters to those people who are conveners because I prefer to be in a broker role. And I definitely feel like that. And that sounds to me like you in Ireland, now being in a different sector, but you've got all sorts of other groups that you can bring to the fray or mix and match with it. So I thought that was just really interesting to actually just position yourself as to where you might be and why, which helps with the intention.
Yeah, the other person actually who talks about, again, this not viewing networks as necessarily transactional is Adam Grant in Give and Take. And he talks about that if you approach networks as just something you're going to get something out of, that you're going to be unsuccessful. And so he again emphasizes this relationship element that's so important and I do think that reframing it, that reframe, so for people like Gina who go, I hate networking, but I bet she doesn't hate meeting people and creating relationships.
Exactly. And I think that that's the thing, is that we may well be, and I know I said it in the intro about the event juggling a canapé tray and business card, or as I say, trying to get your bloody phone out, working out how to make a QR code work now, which seems to be the new way of doing it. But I loved all of the other stuff that I found, which was much more about the relationship building. And another of my favourites, and I think I am actually going to buy the book, but I definitely would recommend it to others, is Taking the Work Out of Networking by Karen Wicker. I don't know if you've come across that one, but she, I didn't have the book, but I was like, oh, come on, short form, pull me something up so that I can actually have a look to see what else she's actually saying here. And her thing about taking that anxiety and hatred out of networking is about the relationships, but she talks an awful lot about low pressure interactions and utilising digital tools. So I was minded. Do you remember when we did the episode Loneliness and we talked about loose ties or loose touch? So you've got the people that you've got a level of intensity with, but that loose touch. And I think that this is for people who may well hate networking, but also for all of the more introverted out there. So when I feel that I might be an introvert, because I don't like it either, but that loose tie element to it is make things more informal, not such high intensity like the glad handing type events, and work out other ways of being in touch with people. So if I think of some of the examples, I've mentioned before about the HR Geek Squad, who I joined. And they're a WhatsApp group in the first instance. I've now met some of them in real life. I'm much more connected with them, but it started out as a WhatsApp group where you could be for HR advice, but you could equally be in the midst of a GIF off unicorns, rainbows, or cats. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. And to begin with, I was a bit like, oh my God, what is this? And then got absolutely into it. I love it because you are building connections with people. People really care about each other in that group. You can bring anything there. It's a safe space. And it was started from something entirely informal. But it's a network, a very different style of doing it. And Karen Wicker is also talking about responding to stuff on LinkedIn, joining the groups via LinkedIn. She also goes in, and I'll shut up in a minute because we can come back to this, but the different usages of social media, what can be better placed on LinkedIn versus Instagram versus Twitter, but all of them in different ways are conversational and absolutely takes that sting out of it a bit in terms of that very bare-ass visible way of networking that we've known of the past that was all about being in the room with a load of suits and feeling horrific. But I thought that was all really interesting about how to actually be networking when it's much more about that relationship.
Yeah, I think that, so that reframe of we're not don't even have to use the word networking if you don't like it. Relationship building. I think one of the interesting things I noticed in some of the things that I was reading is that men generally in the corporate world have multiple hubs. So they have networks into various different groups in a way that you described of the 3 different types of networks. And that has been seen to be really beneficial to male progression up the hierarchy. So that was being viewed as something that women have not tended to do so well, and they would benefit from doing so in terms of, if the aim is to get to the C-suite, then, leveraging some of those. But they also noted that obviously you need networks of men and women, but women particularly in male-dominated environments, and often that is any leadership space. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a male-dominated sector. They benefit from having a close network of women as well. And so, because again, massive generalization, but women have a tendency to be better at being vulnerable and being, I guess, in that way where you said that the women were all close together and sort of holding each other, not physically, but holding each other in a space, that women can be very good at that, and that often men don't necessarily either have the experience or the permission to have that sort of relationship. But women really benefit from that. And I guess I have noticed as I've got older, certainly, that I have a small group of close women, and I guess they are, they are friends, but they are also a support network, and they are people that you can bounce ideas off, or can just, they're all quite diverse and got, really different experiences, and so are a really valuable asset. And I think one of the things I found was that in an article, which I'll share, I can't remember which one it is now, it identified 6 different types of networks that you need to be successful in the workspace. And this is for men and women, right? So this isn't, there are generally, networking, relationship building applies to everyone. I think that where it becomes gendered is the importance, or just where often women are not leveraging those networking or relationship building opportunities as well as maybe they could do, or acknowledging that maybe they just need to do them slightly differently. And also acknowledging that organizations, and we'll get onto this in a little bit when we talk about other types of sort of support elements, that organizations also need to recognize that if they are truly wanting to make more space for female leadership and for women to have equal opportunities in climbing the corporate ladder, that they also need to be aware of the boundaries or hurdles that exist for women, and to make networking, relationship building more easy, or to have more opportunities for them. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the 6 different networks. So first of all, there's the idea network. So you need an idea network. Effectively, if you're stuck, need advice, you just have a network of people who can spark innovation, offer new ways to solve problems. An influence network, that helps you move your ideas through an organization. And you can also maybe have a network, so they could be colleagues who will then become advocates to help you get resources or information in order for you to be able to influence. A development network, which is a group of people who are invested in your growth, or if you're in a group where it's reciprocal, that you're all interested in growth, and they will help you find new opportunities for learning, new opportunities for experiences to be successful in your role. Or they might be able to let you know, there are people who are plugged into your industry and are able to say, oh, well, there's a conference on this, or this learning event is coming up. or they would be able to connect you in with someone within your sector who is an expert in something that you're trying to learn about. Then there's a career network, and that's within and outside your company. So people who you can get some career advice on, whether that's about, interview techniques or a particular company that you're going to. They might be able to help you understand a company better or alert you if there's a job coming up that they think you're a good fit for. Social network, that's the sort of truth tellers and wise, I would, in my experience, wise women, but wise men, truth speakers, people who will give you advice and support through all of your issues, just generally. And then we come on to maybe a bit of a segue into some of the other things, mentors and sponsors. And so having mentors and sponsors in your network, and they're different, and we can talk about that. Mentors speak to you and sponsors speak about you. So sponsors are sort of advocates who will help you move on and up. And mentors are people who speak to you and you bounce ideas off and you learn from each other. And we've had a chat about mentors before. So those were the different ideas of different networks.
Yeah, I am in a similar vein, but different. And I like that list a lot more because what I was looking at was understanding strategic networking types. And of course, they came up with operational, personal, strategic. And I think that in actual fact, those 6 fit into those 3 boxes almost in certain respects.
Yeah, I think that they can overlap and interweave. And, I don't know that anyone will be sitting there with the bubbles of, maybe it would be an interesting exercise to do is to sort of talk about, have a look at visualizing your network. But the mentor thing, and we've talked about how important mentors are before, but I was just kind of, it's really interesting to, or it really brought home to me how important mentoring is in terms of success in going up the corporate ladder, if that's your intention or your ambition. But there's been a number of reports looking at transition into leadership that show men are 22% more likely to be assigned a mentor than a woman. And that then feeds into this idea of organizations needing to really value and acknowledge the importance of networks, because people don't just use networks for their own benefit or for the benefit of others. They also use it to leverage opportunities for their own work and for their own organizations. I know certainly that's how I have often used my networks or engaged with my networks, has been not for my benefit at all. It's been for the benefit of the organization to get something done for an organization. And so, for organizations to realize that some of the research shows that middle management, so executives, men and women, so women at executive level are generally fairly confident or very confident that the networks they're in are supportive of their career, but that's not reflected at middle management. So actually we talked, what was the pulling up the ladder?
Oh, the sticky,
sticky floor.
Yes, or the sticky.
Yes. Oh, yes. Be careful
it's not
how we say that.
Oh, it's a glass ceiling sticky floor, but we called it a, who knows? You've got it completely wrong anyway. Disgusting creature that you are.
It just potty mouthed and my brain in the gutter. Anyway, sticky floor element or the missing rung in the ladder. That at middle management level, women generally are not confident at all that they're in the right networks, and so organizations need to really pay attention to that. And actually that can be really simple things, but providing opportunities for the whole spectrum of in-person networking, virtual networking, internal networking, external networking, one-to-ones, one-to-manys. There's all of those different opportunities, but also helping people expand their networks, which does mean that they have to fund tendencies at this amazing boat trip thing that when you initially described it sound awful, but seriously, being fed and discoed and fed alcohol, I think I can.
Funnily enough, I'm not even sure that they're on anymore. They were amazing, but it was oh my god, yes, it was definitely an experience, and out of comfort zone, and I needed to sleep for weeks afterwards. But it was, but
well, I can imagine. But I mean,
yeah, but all joking aside, what it came to be was that I had done all of the planning on things that the organisation needed in 3 days. It was so intentional, and then I could have other meetings, or just because of course you then had to deal with the whole phone calls and emails and bollocks that you got after the event. But I'd already done my sifting as to who I wanted to be in more contact with, and I kid you not, but out of that conference I got new jobs. So when we say we don't get anything out of it, was this level of connection that I have maintained with people for the last 20 years as a result of that 3-day intensity. Got jobs, got recommendations. I bought loads of things for organisations and brought them into more than one organisation, and met an inordinate network, a lot of which I still keep alive. But it was sort of horrendous when I first thought about it.
Yeah, and I get, that when you started to describe it, it sounded horrific. But the reality is that attending conferences and having organisations fund you going on conferences, viewing these as, oh, it's just a jolly and let's cut it out of the budget, actually is really short-sighted in terms of growth and development, learning and development for people, particularly if you've identified someone as a up-and-coming leader, or a woman who is an up-and-coming leader but is still struggling in terms of how they get their networks, or having developed their networks. So I do think that, organisations also play a part in making it easier, identifying opportunities, acknowledging it's important, acknowledging that it needs time, and allowing time, allocating time for that, rather than just viewing it as a nice to have or a bit of a jolly. And while I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. I remember that I had a boss who absolutely seemed to view anything that had any enjoyment in it as something that shouldn't be done, because it was spending company money on enjoyment. And you're like, well, no, it's spending company money on doing something important. We happen to also enjoy it. But she seemed to equate anything that had any joy in it as something that was a waste of money, and that she felt that she had to remove. And I just found that an extraordinary approach, that surely if there's something that people have to do and they enjoy it.
No, I agree, because whilst the boat might be no more, it was a boss who decided to do the cancellation of it because it sounded like we had too much fun. We had a load of fun, but we got a bloody load of work done because we were intentional about it. So to your point about the organisation's responsibility in all of this, what I do find is that the cost of some of these conferences that are put on are astronomical. You've got to know what value you're going to get out of it, hence this intentionality. So, having been in that realm, both for myself and with my teams, we're back to, and I've remembered who it was now, Stephen Covey, in terms of the important urgent matrix. You can do a version of this around this as well. So if it's of high importance and urgency, something that you really need to go to for the organisation or for self, you make it happen. There may well be that you've got to make time for it, as you're suggesting, which is more of a longer term burn to it. Sometimes you could send somebody else, and sometimes it really is just a treat. So there's that angle to it with the organisation. And what I would say is that when my team members wanted to go to something, I would be the first to say, okay, let's talk about what we're going to get out of it. I'm going for your list of things, of what's the networking for. So if it was just for a treat, sometimes that might be right. And that I would use it as a level of reward for them. But equally, when we started going through the list, it may well be about ideas, it may well be about development, it could have been social, whatever it might be. But I would also then want them to present to the team as to what they've learned when they came back.
Yeah.
So I'd often be going, okay, so you want the whole team to go through, all three of you to go, okay, fine. I want to know Sarah Abercrombie, I'm sure you're listening to this because this is what I made you do, but I want to know how you're actually splitting stuff up. I don't want all three of you going to the same thing. Pick so that we get loads of it done, loads of the presentation's gone to, because you're all going to different things. Sort it all out, but I'm very happy because we'll learn loads. So the organisation, as well as giving the opportunities, need to support people in the intention, either for the organisation or for themselves. But the other thing I was going to say is that, especially for this middle manager range that we're talking about, I want us to think about things that they can do for themselves as well, so that they're not wholly, because I think we've found our way about, you can't be wholly reliant on an organisation ever to do all this stuff for you. So how can you help yourself being intentional? And there's another book I came across written by Herminia Ibarra, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. And she talks about the difference between insight and outsight. And we talk a lot about insight, reflecting, analysing our strengths and weaknesses, blah, blah, blah. But networking fits into the outside box, which is about act and experiment your way into new things. Act and experiment your way into new things. So that sort of like says, let's take a look at all of the networks that you are currently in or not in, and think about your intention in each of those. So when I read that, I sort of like did it for myself a bit at the moment, but just in the operational, personal, strategic boxes. So my operational networks currently are very much about where I'm working. And there's more of that because I'm now, as an independent, working across a range of organisations. So that gives me a wider expanse. It's that expansionist bit is almost that, from an internal perspective, I'm in an internal role in more than one place. The personal, there's an awful lot there for me in terms of the giving back mode. So my choir, being a school governor, screaming in the stands for Harlequins week in, week out, but being in my sports network, my family and friends. And there'll be more in that sort of like role. And then the strategic one is very much at the moment about the LinkedIn, much more the digital aspect to it. I'm not going out to loads and loads of conferences because the affordability of that, when you're an independent. So you've got to, so you need to find the freebies, you need to find different angles. And so a lot of that is coming from the digital network side of things, but there'll be a slower burn. So back to that informality of chatting with people and being in LinkedIn groups or responding to chats in Twitter. I'm not on Twitter, but it's another one. Instagram is very much more about from a visual interaction. And Karen Wicker is talking about those three different sort of like elements to that. But I think from the middle management perspective, you could do that exercise.
I wonder whether, just going back a little bit to the mentor thing, and to reiterate some of the stuff I've seen, that, having a mentor doubles the likelihood that a professional female will secure a board seat. Also, if you have a mentor, you are then more likely to go on and be a mentor. So, there's a lovely circle with that. And so, I'm not suggesting that you don't get things out of networks. I think it's the intentionality, as you say, of you don't join a network solely for the purpose of getting stuff out. Often the stuff you get out of it it's a long game. You don't know when an opportunity will arise. And actually, Kingsley Aikens, he's got a webinar on his website, which I'll share, that's called the Career Accelerator. So talking about how networking is a career accelerator, but also he focuses on reconnecting with dormant connections. And so, that's about those, people that you've known for ages ago. And I did a little experiment on LinkedIn a few months ago where I did sort of put out a thing saying, hey, I've got all these connections on LinkedIn, but actually a lot of people that I haven't spoken to for ages. And, I challenge people to sort of say, hey, come and say hi, or I'll reach out to people. And I had some really lovely chats with some fairly dormant connections. And I guess, as you say, if you've managed to create a network of people that you met 20 years ago, I'm sure that you don't speak to them every single day or every single week, but they're still part of those dormant connections, those people that you have created a relationship with, even if it is a fairly weak relationship, those are all part of your network. And I think that it would be a really interesting thing to go through your networks, or go through and sort of pop people into those groups of whether it's the 6 or the 3, identify whether they're sort of dormant connections or active connections. And then if you have a mentor, talk to the mentor to get some advice as to, maybe a strategy in terms of how you are going to reconnect with dormant connections, which ones you want to prioritize. Same with this idea of being intentional about the expensive conferences, etc. How do you justify to the boss or the organization if there's 5 of these really cool conferences? Talk with your mentor if you have one. Say, which of these conferences should I be which is going to benefit me or will give the most bang for the buck? And then how do I focus on how I am going to be strategic about it so I can sell it to my boss? I think that, all of those sort of things are a really great conversation to have if you have a mentor. And if you're in middle management and you are not seeing that you've got a sufficient network to leverage, then getting a mentor to help you, or a coach, because actually if it's a single focal thing, I want to increase my networks, that's a coaching task that you could work through with a coach. Or it's a longer term thing with a mentor where you might want to have a chat with them about, I've got a strong network here, I haven't got so many people that I would identify in this group, I haven't got a sponsor, I'd be really interested in talking with you about ideas about how to get a sponsor in an organization. So I do think you're right that there are lots of things that we can do for ourselves. If you're in that middle management stage or in the early stage, you're just stepping into a role where a mentor can really help you, or a coach could really help you start to focus on being strategic about your networks. And there's nothing wrong with being strategic about saying, well, I don't really know enough people in this area. For me, when I came to Ireland, I literally joined everything. I went to everything. So I wasn't really very strategic.
But you were in the expansionist mode because you didn't know what you didn't know. And so that is quite intentional. All joking, I'm not trying to let you off the. I'm not trying to let you off the hook, but I think it is in that mode because look, we will be in a requirement for a network for all sorts of different reasons. And I tell you the other thing that I align it to is if you're looking at marketing something, you create a marketing plan and you have a whole range of channels as to how you're going to get out to sell something, right? If you're in an organization, middle management or leadership, you more often than not will have a stakeholder plan. Again, who are the stakeholders? What do you need to be telling them about? You're intentional about that. The channels that you're actually going to get, you'll find your gaps. And so a networking plan is absolutely the same with the different channels to it. It's still that level of intention to it. And I was going to say something else really quite life-affirming then as well, if I say so myself, and now I can't remember what it was. No, it's gone. I think it was mostly about having that plan.
Yeah, I guess my plan was just to bombard everyone and meet everyone and then be able to sort of pop people into different groups. I joined Toastmasters, so it's a public speaking group. And after having been invited to go and speak at an event and seeing the bio of one of the other speakers, and she was in Toastmasters, and I was like, oh, that sounds like I do public speaking, I do a lot of speakings, but you can always hone your craft, and it sounded like a good, interesting thing to do, and I joined. I'm the president of that club now.
Of course you are.
So, and that also has brought, even if I do so myself, I get a chain and everything, but that has opened up opportunities that I hadn't envisaged when I initially went, because it was really much more for a social thing. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to, just have some friends.
Oh my God.
I wanted some friends. But since then, I've met all kinds of people that I would never have met in the little circles that I was already in. I've met people who are beekeepers, I've met teachers, I've met physios, I've met nurses, I've met AI specialists and students. So there's a really nice demographic of young through to older, retired people, really experienced speakers, competition speakers, and then people from all over the world who have ended up in Ireland. And so that was a really great opportunity that I hadn't really envisaged it, where it came from.
So that's the thing. So that list of the types of networks, they will evolve. So you started out in the social mode, and now you've probably moved into it being a place for ideas, influence, development, whatever it might be. And I think that's the other thing is the evolution, because that was the point I was going to make, is that, you know, the things that we may well be seeking in our different groups could be about feedback. It could be about insights. It could be about learning and growth. It could be around the next promotion. It could be about a job move. There's a whole host of different reasons. And the more diverse you have in your network, the more chances those boxes are all going to get ticked. And they will come, as you're rightly pointing out, sometimes from the most unusual of networks. And that's being in that expansion mode, but also being the broker mode of being in one place, but realizing that you can do other things in the place that you find yourself. So I think all of those elements, suddenly that, oh God, I've got to go and make polite, crappy conversation with somebody I don't know, is completely out of the window, because that's not what it's all about. You know, it's very much about just doing it wherever you are, but seeing it as relationship building. I think that takes the pressure out of it so much. And as you've rightly pointed out, something that Gina would do easily without having the networking word added to it.
So we make networking the word
exactly
say, and we just call it.
The other thing that I wanted to say as well, which goes hand in hand with the relationship building, is we're back to authenticity and being ourselves. And so I would also suggest to people to find the environments where you feel most comfortable with being yourself, and then get into environments which might feel a bit uncomfortable, but where you still are courageous enough to be yourself. Some of that you'll find is easier online, but that's the other thing about, and we'll get into this a lot more when we do the branding episode, but there is that you and I, and there are many others out there, and leaders need to be doing this as well, who are Bobby Davis, Bridge, whatever surname you might be using at the time. And
you make me sound like an international criminal.
And said it here first. And whoever you are, be the same online as you are in person, as you are in whichever network you actually find yourself to be, because that's what becomes more comfortable and makes relationship building that much easier, because you're not trying to be something that you're not.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And my other top tip would be join stuff. Go and join groups, whether they're online, learn about stuff, even if it doesn't immediately strike you as something that's going to be beneficial to your career now. Lots of this stuff is a long game. It's about building relationships. It's about going, oh, I know someone who is, whether that's helping someone else or helping yourself or helping the organisation, but joining stuff, doing stuff diversely is really key. And again, not viewing it as networking, just viewing it as I joined this club, or I joined this WhatsApp group, or I'm having a chat online, or I posted this thing. Do stuff, join stuff, be proactive, even if often it's not necessarily in a particularly strategic way, albeit at some point you do need to strategize.
I think that brings me very nicely to my final quote, if you're ready. If you're ready. Yay. So, networking is more about farming than it is about hunting. It's about cultivating relationship.
Hear, hear.
Lovely.
When you said that.
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that, and I can't remember the damn name now. Why do I just write these things down and never put down the name of people? I am rubbish. Sorry, whoever it is that said it, because it's brilliant. And I will find out who you are. For my network.
Cool.
Take care.
Thanks, Bobby. And
bye.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening. We are so happy that you are in our network.
Do get in touch if you want to say hi. We're planning our seasonal mini-series of Hanging Out With, so if you'd like to tell us about your favourite episodes and why you keep listening, give us a yell. Next week, we're talking about followership and being a leader without a title in Being a Leading Follower. See you then.